Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Mark Siegel. I'm the founder and CEO of ESG Today. And I'm really excited today to launch our first ever webinar series. And I'm thrilled that we're able to do so with SE Advisory Service, the global consulting practice of Schneider Electric. Over this four-part seminar series, we're going to have experts from SE Advisory Services guide you through the foundations of environmental performance, starting today with the measurement of environmental metrics, and then later on this week with management of environmental risks and impacts, setting targets to improve environmental performance, and then on actually taking action to improve environmental performance. Let me just here put in a quick housekeeping note before we dive into our session. These sessions are going to be pretty jam-packed, and we're not going to be able to have live Q&A, but please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section, and your questions will be answered by email. So with that, let's get right into today's seminar, which will focus on measurement, governance, and strategy. Over the course of this week, we'll explore how these topics relate to each other and provide a roadmap for both future-proofing your sustainability strategy and achieving an A in CDP. Our speakers will explain how to optimize your governance mechanisms and strategy, advise which environmental metrics your organization should be tracking, and describe how these activities prepare you both for CDP and other disclosure frameworks. So today, our speakers are Tiana Nguyen, a sustainability consultant who specializes in greenhouse gas inventory development and brings a background in sustainability planning and management to her work. Stephanie Gibbon, a sustainability consultant who specializes in CDP reporting and leads SE Advisory Services cross-functional CDP working group. And Camille Van Egmond, a senior associate who works closely with clients to improve data quality, streamline inventories, and translate complex regulatory and reporting requirements into practical, usable systems. So with that, let me hand it right over to Tiana to kick us off and get us started. And Tiana, I think you're muted.
I think that possibly Gianna is having connectivity issues.
Okay.
Stephanie, are you able to just take over until Tiana is able to join again?
I was muted. Yes, absolutely. Happy to do that. Yeah, so today we're going to be covering main objectives around CDP reporting, talking about governance and strategy, which is what I'll be walking you through, the importance of taking action there. And Camille will walk you through the best measurement practices there and how you can best focus on reporting your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and how setting targets can help strengthen your sustainability program as well. And finally, we'll close the session by discussing how to go further, and we'll discuss how to advance your sustainability maturity and identify the next steps in your journey. You can jump to the next slide, please. So first, I think the next slide as well. Apologies. Perfect. Yeah, so future-proofing your sustainability journey. Our goal is practical for this framework. We're going to be focusing on how to embed sustainability into your core business strategy, what it is to measure, how to govern it, and how to stay ahead of evolving expectations. So for those who are not familiar with CDP, CDP is the world's most comprehensive environmental disclosure database and benchmarking platform across climate, forest, commodities, and water. It updates annually, so scoring reflects the latest best practices, and its continual alignment with other initiatives has made it centralized, cross-cutting disclosure. That's why we use the A-list criteria in this framework to show as a strategic anchor moving forward. There are two different lenses through which you can view the information that we'll present today that we can apply to your organization. Those are you already report to CDP and those who do not. If you already report to CDP, our topics are going to cover how to strengthen your strategic sustainability governance and align with A-list expectations. And the other aspect is in introducing A-list environmental metrics to not just disclose, but to drive broader corporate social responsibility and decision-making. Through the lens of a non-CDP reporter, the information here will align with the executive management. We'll talk about fostering top management buy-in and strengthening sustainability governance. It's going to be covering also disclosing the right metrics right away, which ones to focus on, which environmental metrics to track now, and how to establish a credible performance baseline. And finally, we'll be focusing on regulatory readiness, how to prepare for compliance changes and build future-proof processes by mapping frameworks that overlap from the start. So the bottom line of this session is to equip you with sustainability and how to embed it into your core business and sustainability strategy, and position your organization resilient and future-ready and competitive. And next, we'll be going over to me, which is governance and strategy, so I can jump over to my slides as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Gibbon. You've already heard quite a bit of my voice, but today I'll be walking you through the importance of governance and strategy. And we'll be covering the main point of this framework, which is action. So a lot of times in the sense of action in sustainability world, we tend to think more along the lines of emissions reduction projects and energy efficiency initiatives. But often the most critical aspect of action is overlooked, but is the most important and happens much earlier in the process. This happens in the investments that companies put into governance structures and into strategic planning. It is the foundation that makes every other sustainability component, when you think of measurement, target setting, and managing your performance, it's what makes all of that possible. They're not just reporting categories, but they allow your program to scale and maintain credibility in the evolving landscape that is regulatory requirements and the frameworks that update annually, like CDP as an example. On the left side of the screen, you'll see 6 key areas that CDP uses to evaluate the overall maturity of a program. And I'll be providing concrete examples of how to take action and what that means for governance and strategy. You can jump to the next slide. Okay, so where to focus with governance and strategy? Like I said before, when we think of action, it's really along the lines of emissions and reporting. But these 6 key areas that are most relevant to CDP, but are widely applicable across other frameworks and regulatory requirements, they're all kind of tied into these 6 main themes. We'll start at board competency and we'll work our way clockwise through the chart. So with board competency, CDP wants to make sure that your board is not only aware of environmental issues and industry trends, but they also have the competency to guide oversight in your program. So some good examples of what it means to take action in board competency here is to establish mandatory annual training for board members, focusing on climate risks and opportunities, those industry-specific trends, and also any regulatory changes. The next we have is management responsibility. This is all about ownership and accountability. So leadership's role in this, they must have accountability for specific environmental issues that are relevant to your industry. This means naming who owns the strategy, who implements it, and how information flows upward. Best example of how just disclosing versus taking action here is that a COO or a CSO might be directly accountable for achieving the energy and emissions goals that your company sets. This is also maybe supported by an ESG sustainability team or a steering committee to make sure you're making progress forward. Next we have is monetary incentives. We find that compensation alignment is one of the strongest levers for progress forward in your sustainability program. CDP evaluates whether or not executive or business bonuses are tied to trending. So an example of this is, 10% of an executive team's bonus might be tied to actual reduction in your year-on-year emissions trends. This is a really great way to showcase that, yes, we are aware that this is a great way to accelerate progress, and we are doing it. Next, we have environmental policy, and this is the accountability anchor, right? We talked about the management responsibility, the competency of the board, but environmental policy integration is a great way to make sure that climate risks and opportunities and sustainability action is actually embedded into the overall operational procedures of your organization. We want to make sure that it's part of your strategic decision making. A good example of taking action for environmental policy might be having a procurement policy that's related to suppliers having a circularity practices and being really transparent on their emissions, so it better prepares you on your overall supply chain sustainability footprint. Next, we have collaborative frameworks. This is an opportunity to expand your expertise outside of your immediate team. So great examples include thinking about joining the Science Based Target Network or collaborating with a local clean energy coalition. We find that this really creates a really strong team of shared knowledge and also reduces those implementation barriers when it comes to internal sustainability teams trying to move their sustainability programs forward. It also provides really great blueprints on how to actually take action and what it means to take action in your industry. And last, we have board structure and oversight. It's really closely tied to board competency and management responsibility. But again, this is CDP's way to evaluate the maturity and how well environmental policy is integrated into your overall sustainability program. This is a way for CDP to examine whether or not oversight is actually formalized. Great examples of this include having a sustainability or ESG committee, how often they meet, and also to make sure that not only your program moves forward, but any progress on that is flowed upward to the board, and making sure that the whole company is operating on the environmental agenda that you set. So not only are these really great examples of how you can take action in governance and strategy, but they are also very closely aligned with other global frameworks. And being aligned with these 6 key areas for CDP really prepares you for those reporting to other frameworks. And we're going to discuss that in the next slide here. Thank you. So CDP is the foundation for global regulatory alignment. And you'll see that here on the table, right? We've got some kind of shifting levels of effort required if you're a CDP A-lister. And CDP A-listers are truly familiar with the importance of not only disclosing, but also showing the action taken, right? This is showing your work, showing that, yes, we are aware of what it means to, as an example, have monetary incentives. We're aware that this makes an effort and makes a change in our program. And we are taking that change and we are implementing that in our overall program. Something I like to point out here specifically is California SB 253 and 261. Kind of the differences there points out what I mentioned earlier of the classic example of what it means to take action. And California bills are a great example of the twofold of taking action in reporting your emissions, and then also taking action in your governance and strategy and reporting on those, right? So in 253, you're required to disclose your emissions and set targets and make progress in reducing your emissions, right? And then in 261, CDP is even a little more evaluative and detailed than that of 261, but that means you're just over-prepared for that reporting framework, which is great. We kind of have a saying that's, write once, read many. You're able to write this CDP report once annually and apply it to frameworks in the future, and you just build upon that year after year. And CDP has done a great job in terms of implementing other global frameworks for into the overall questionnaire, right? So IFRS and CSRD, they're really closely aligned. So if you nail your governance and strategy aspects for CDP, you're very well prepared for other global frameworks. And to close up this slide, I like to talk about, governance and strategy are not just reporting requirements here. I do believe that it is the core action that makes every other aspect of your sustainability program set up to succeed. That's why governance and strategy fall under the action framework within our seminar's list of themes, right? Because building upon these actions unlocks effective measurement, credible target setting, and continuous management improvement, which Camille and my other colleagues will be covering in later seminars this week. And that's it. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie, and thank you so much for jumping in there. If I could keep you for a minute here, let me just ask a couple of quick questions. So just looking at your presentation, I mean, I think the analysis really assumes that companies earning high CDP scores are kind of automatically well prepared for other sustainability disclosure frameworks, as you just showed. But what about companies that have never reported to CDP? And just to really put you on the spot, like how difficult would you say it is for companies to begin reporting to external frameworks, especially given today's geopolitical uncertainties? How can they continue to advocate for sustained investment in these kinds of climate and sustainability actions?
Yeah, those are great questions and honestly really common. Not something we haven't heard before, right? So I would say that it might seem very daunting to respond to CDP and other frameworks if you haven't before. But it's also, I like to point out that CDP has a scoring scale, right? It starts at disclosure, goes up to awareness, management, and leadership. And while we're working with CDP A-listers that are achieving that leadership scoring, we're also working with companies at the disclosure level. It's also important to note that everyone who has ever responded to CDP, they have started at just that disclosure or awareness level. So that's nothing to be ashamed of or thinking you're not as mature, because every company has started at that point. And that's why CDP has a disclosure level. It's important to start from somewhere. Another aspect of that is that this is coming up on my 7th year of working with CDP clients. And clients all the way from at the beginning who have never reported to CDP, and those who are making their 8th A list or something like that. And everyone in between, they always have something to learn when it comes to their CDP response, right? They change it annually. It's updated to make sure you're responding to the most up-to-date frameworks and questions. So even if you're starting at the disclosure level, you will have something to learn just like those responding at the A list. And then to your point of the geopolitical landscape that we're currently in, it's a completely reasonable question, but I also think that if you take sustainability out of that question, what we're doing is inherently just operational resilience for companies, right? That's a key aspect of no matter where you are in the world, you want to make sure your organization is prepared. And that's broken up into 2 sections, I think, which is risk management and cost savings. So risk management, we're increasingly seeing that climate and social risks are financially material to companies. And we find that through materiality assessments or reporting. So that's just a baseline of future-proofing your organization. And next, we have cost savings, which is, you think about energy efficiency and reduced resource consumption. Those are inherently aspects of future-proofing an organization and making sure that you are prepared. So sustainability is already deeply intertwined into how organizations operate. So I just think it's, to say that sustainability actions maybe aren't worth it in this geopolitical landscape is like saying you're not going to focus on risk management. So it's already, deeply intertwined, and I think very important to think about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, great. So thanks, Stephanie. And let me pass the stage over to Camille, and let's dig into measurement of environmental performance, if I can.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Stephanie. So now that we've built an understanding of governance and strategy, let's start to focus on measurement. Measurement is really how we translate commitments into decisions, cost control, resilience, and compliance. So I'm going to start off by defining what to measure, why it matters, and then we're going to show how CDP data aligns with other frameworks and show how your efforts really scale beyond a single questionnaire. So why measure? There is an exponential demand for environmental data from investors, customers, and regulators. And CDP really provides a standardized, comparable way to disclose management and performance on environmental metrics. So in regards to risk and value creation with climate metrics, energy use and emissions really drive costs and transition risk. Without robust measurement across scope 1, scope 2, and relevant scope 3, companies really cannot manage volatility, set credible targets, or demonstrate progress on those targets. In regards to water, water is a critical production input and it's a rising risk area. So scarcity and tariffs have been creating direct financial and reputational impacts. Many companies recognize water as a material risk, but far fewer have implemented adequate mitigation. So there is a big execution gap that measurement helps close in regards to water. So for forests are now a regulatory and market access issue. So the EU deforestation regulation, the EUDR, has introduced fines and product exclusion risks, which is really making traceability and deforestation free commercially essential for all. So really bottom line here is measurement translates environmental exposure into operational control, cost management, resilience, and ultimately brand trust. And frameworks like CDP really help companies structure that journey at scale. So really with the why established, we want to move into the what to measure and how that scales across different maturity levels.
So Camille, if I can jump in, just as we're discussing before, but like companies, you're just getting started or sort of advancing. If you look at all three, which of these areas do you think companies should really prioritize when investing in data collection and measurement?
Yes, great question. Again, a common question. Ideally, all are important, right? But the answer of what's most important, I think, will really change depending on industry and material risk of the different categories. But most likely, overall, we would advise companies starting with prioritizing climate. So climate risk is directly tied to energy cost, regulatory exposure, and investor expectations. Measuring scope 1 and 2 emissions really builds the foundation for managing volatility and preparing for transition risk. And then from there, you can really start to focus on collecting water and forest data. So you want to start with climate as the structural baseline, and then you can expand into the other categories. So we can transition into the what now. Okay, so we've covered the why about measurement. So now let's discuss what we need to measure. So with CDP, the expectation is to measure systematically across energy, emissions, water, and forest. So I'm going to start with climate and then water and then go to forests. And we're going to walk through kind of core expectations, and then I'll walk through a little maturity guidance for the different categories. So in regards to climate, energy, and emissions, the core expectations really are measuring fuel and energy use by source and by country, clearly distinguishing between renewable versus non-renewable. Measuring fully your scope 1 and scope 2, location-based and market-based emissions, and then any relevant scope 3 emissions, and making sure to be really transparent about your methodologies and your boundaries. A-list expectations for climate is essentially just 100% energy and emissions coverage, and then a full scope 1 through 3 disclosure. And then kind of the cherry on top of fully disclosing and being 100% transparent is getting that information verified. So having a third-party auditor come in and verify your energy and your emissions. And so a little maturity path in regards to climate, if you're starting out on your ESG journey, the first things we'd advise you guys do would be start centralizing your energy data. So define your boundaries, start collecting data, calculate your Scope 1 emissions, and start focusing on your Scope 2 location-based emissions. As you start to build in your ESG journey, and we recommend adding in your Scope 2 market-based emissions, starting to screen your Scope 3, and then implementing some data controls. And then finally, the more advanced you are in your ESG journey, we really see companies start sourcing supplier-specific emission factors, really having accurate data ingestion systems. So oftentimes those data systems will be automated, implementing assurance every year, and then potentially an internal carbon pricing system. Okay, so we've covered climate. Let's go to water. Really, the core expectations with water are disclosing your withdrawals by source, your discharges by destination and treatment level, so primary, secondary, tertiary, and then consumption tracking. Also identifying pollutant risks and monitoring that discharge quality. Also, CDP really stresses assessing your operations in water-stressed areas, and then using recognized indicators for that risk evaluation. So if we go into kind of, again, our maturity assessment for water measurement, the earlier companies in their ESG journey will want to start establishing site water balances and then just basic monitoring. As you grow more advanced, you're implementing reuse strategies and basin risk screenings. And then advanced companies are really integrating risk modeling, supplier mapping, and getting, again, that external verification of data and targets. Okay, and then for forests, core expectation for forests is really just tracking your commodity volumes and tracking the origins of those commodities. Also making sure to include the traceability to different sourcing areas, and then looking at deforestation-free status sourcing. And so really the A-list expectation for forest is just tracking the majority of your commodities and the sourcing of volumes from the different countries. Okay, and then maturity path for forest. If you're starting out in your ESG journey, we recommend starting to just map those tier 1 suppliers and start identifying those risk hotspots. As you become more advanced, you're expanding your traceability, implementing no deforestation policies and grievance mechanisms. And then really what we're seeing for advanced ESG companies, they're having great alignment with regulatory information and due diligence requirements. And then again, getting the verification as that cherry on top. So really putting it all together, the points that we want to drive home with what to measure, what you're hearing across all the different commodities is, establish data ownership at the site and function levels. Start implementing calculation methods, change logs, data dictionaries, just getting really in the weeds and familiar with your data. And then you would want to transition to introducing those tiered controls, right? Having some sort of monthly, quarterly, yearly variance checks, exception flags, and audit trail for your data. Okay, so now we've covered what to measure. Now, how does this data play into other frameworks? So CDP is not a standalone island, which we saw Stephanie discuss earlier. So CDP's measurement metrics across climate, water, and forests are really strongly aligned with leading frameworks. CDP performance really reduces incremental reporting efforts elsewhere. And so the main point we want to drive home here is alignment up front, lowers future compliance costs and builds resilience as regulation evolves. So what you'll see on this slide is we're breaking down basically the incremental effort to align with other frameworks if you're responding to CDP. And again, we're breaking it down just like CDP does with climate, water, and forests. So I'll walk through each of the commodities again. So you'll see with climate, CDP has a really high alignment, low incremental effort with other frameworks and regulations. So really minimal effort to align with ESRS, CSRD, IFRS, GRI, California, and TCFD. And so this is really reflecting how climate reporting has matured globally. And if a company is on the A list for CDP for climate, you are really structurally positioned for aligning with most major regulatory expectations. And we're really seeing climate measurement be the most transferable data set across other frameworks. In regards to water, there's a little more variability. Alignment is moderate with ESRS and GRI, but minimal with TNFD, and then just not required with a lot of other frameworks. So water expectations are expanding, but they are not yet uniformly embedded across all standards, really like climate is. And then in regards to forests, targeted, right, but increasingly material. So we are still seeing some significant alignment gap requirement for ESRS and GRI, minimal again with TNFD, and then again, not required for others. So forest and biodiversity metrics are much more framework specific today, but momentum is really building, especially in Europe. You've heard me mention the EUDR regulation a few times. So overall, where some gaps might exist, ESRS, CSRD might require some additional biodiversity and pollution metrics. GRI includes site-level biodiversity, which is currently not included with CDP forest right now. So a small gap there. And TNFD has introduced additional nature-related metrics that, again, not covered with CDP right now. So really just reinforcing CDP is highly aligned, obviously not fully comprehensive for every framework, but by using climate as your base, you are in a great position to be mostly aligned with other frameworks. So really, again, we recommend using CDP as your measurement backbone. So by doing that, you're able to create consistent systems to collect, validate, and govern sustainability data across your organization. Strong CDP performance today is going to translate into lower compliance friction tomorrow. So I will pass it back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks. Let me throw a quick question at you. Just looking at the slide, which is just fantastic, and I wish I had just sort of had that in front of me all the time when I'm doing my reporting. But you can just see the compliance burden, all these frameworks, even with CDP helping you align, and with IFRS harmonizing and all that. But the compliance burden for companies is obviously growing. And again, now we have New York's newly announced regulations as well, right? It's not even on the slide because it's so new, but it always, it keeps changing. And like you're saying, and we know that, IFRS is trying to harmonize sustainability compliance. But there's still, just looking at the slide, there's still clearly differences across the frameworks. So would you say that, alignment with multiple frameworks, would that translate into measurable business benefits? Like improved investor confidence, risk resilience, cost savings, or would you classify it mostly as a compliance-driven exercise?
Yeah, great question. So sustainability regulations, I feel like they're always expanding, right? There's always something new popping up, and all the frameworks are changing all the time. So totally understand, and we hear that a lot from clients, right? Alignment across all these frameworks feels very compliance driven. However, really, if your sustainability ESG programs are built on a unified data and governance foundation, alignment delivers real business value. So consistent disclosures strengthen that investor confidence. It reduces perceived risk and really just improves resilience by surfacing those operational and supply chain exposures early. So that information really comes to light quicker, more efficiently. We're really seeing the benefits move beyond compliance when reporting infrastructure supports that strategic decisions and capital allocation rather than just simply meeting regulatory requirements.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so if Tiana's back on, let me pass it over to her, and she'll take us through the end of through the rest of the session.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so as we close out today's seminar, I'd like to leave you with a clear view of where organizations can go next in their sustainability journey and tie in some of those methods and strategies Camille and Stephanie covered into a clear path forward. Next slide, please. So that's perfect, actually. And that path forward really depends on where you currently stand in terms of maturity. And there are several key levers that can help you advance. So first, for organizations in the earliest stages, trainings and workshops can be a powerful starting point. These sessions are tailored for executive committees and boards, and they help define company-wide strategies or address topic-specific needs for leadership teams. As maturity grows, focus shifts to measurement. Today, you heard from Camille on how this involves strengthening the accuracy of your energy and emissions mapping, analyzing risks with raw material procurement, and assessing water footprints. At this stage, deploying software tools can unify measurement, governance, and ensures consistent data flows.
Stephanie and Camille, I think Tiana's having connectivity issues again. Is one of you able to just take over for her quickly?
Yes, I can finish us out. Okay, so I think Tiana just left off on the training and workshops, right, as you're moving forward within your CDP journey. And so once we've got those training and workshops aligned within your organization, that's when you really transition into that measurement, which is what I covered earlier. After the measurement, we're moving into life cycle assessments. And then again, that cherry on top, which is the auditing, the verification of that information, and then action plans. And so finally rounding out with really having an overall strong environmental strategy and really positioning yourself to be more mature in regards to your ESG metrics.
Okay. Guys, so I think that takes us to the end of today's session, and is a great way to kick off the week. Thank you so much. I really like to thank Tiana, who will be back later this week, so we can hear more from her when she's connected. And Stephanie and Camille, thanks so much for taking us through the first session in the series. We hope to see everyone back here at the same time tomorrow. We'll have another great panel taking us through risk and adaptation. Again, as I mentioned before, please leave your questions in the comments section, and they'll be answered by email. And a reminder to everyone that the seminar recordings will be shared with you via email. So that's it. That wraps up today. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all tomorrow.